In the blood-soaked muck of ancient battlefields, Spartan men dropped like broken toys under foreign spears. For them, death was quick, merciful. Their wives back home? Oh, those poor wretches were just clocking in for a nightmare shift the gods wrote as a sick joke. The minute some sweaty messenger dragged himself into Sparta carrying defeat, the women's lives flipped like rotten meat on a spit. From honored wives to walking corpses, buried alive in shame. Imagine being punished harder for your husband's failure than he was for actually dying. Sparta sold itself as glory in crimson cloaks and bronze shields. But peel back the shine and you find a bureaucracy of cruelty dripping into every bedroom. This wasn't tradition. It was industrial-grade sadism disguised as patriotism. They'd weaponized shame and injected it straight into families. Sparta didn't do therapy. They did humiliation on steroids. The hypocrisy was glorious. Sparta worshipped strength, but used women as monuments to weakness. These wives had sent their husbands off with the line, "Come back with your shield or on it." But what if he came back with nothing but cowardice? She paid. She became the gravestone to his failure, the city's living plague. Basically, your husband flopped, and now you're the neighborhood's public service announcement. Respect evaporated instantly. Friends bolted, families slammed doors, neighbors crossed streets like cowardice was contagious. This wasn't casual cruelty. It was law, custom, civic duty. A coward's wife wasn't a woman anymore. She was a breathing quarantine zone. It's like getting canceled in 4th century Greece, with no chance of a comeback tour. Writers like Xenophon and Plutarch documented it all. Systematic dehumanization so vicious even battle-hardened soldiers winced. These women weren't alive, weren't dead, just dumped into purgatory with no exit sign. And Sparta loved it. Every citizen had to watch them rot, a warning carved in flesh. Fail in battle, and your family becomes a circus act of disgrace. Why fear death when you can fear your wife being turned into a community punching bag? This wasn't chaos, it was design. Sparta perfected psychological warfare against its own people. From birth, boys were scanned like defective goods, tossed if weak, broken into killers if strong. Women weren't spared. They were trained to breed warriors like prize mares. And the cruelest part? These wives did everything demanded, birthed sons, held households, lived Spartan ideals. But once their husbands lost, all that loyalty was spat on. They weren't women anymore, just props in Sparta's morality play. Sparta's thank you note to loyal wives, a one-way ticket to humiliation hell. The Spartan system didn't accidentally fall into cruelty. It manufactured it like a damn factory line. The punishment of a coward's wife wasn't a mob tantrum. It was a state-sponsored demolition job. Bureaucracy and crimson cloaks sharpened cruelty disguised as order. Sparta basically invented HR, but the H stood for humiliation. The Ephor's 5 smug administrators elected each year were the accountants of misery. They knew the script. Wives of disgraced warriors weren't wives anymore. They were inventory to be reclassified, stamped, and discarded. Imagine being reduced from citizen's wife to defective merchandise overnight. Sparta even ranked humiliation. If your husband died fighting but the unit lost, you got moderate shame. If he ran, that was severe. But surrender, jackpot of disgrace. Ask the wives of the 120 men at Sphacteria in 425 BCE. They got the full deluxe package of cruelty with no refund. Bronze, silver, gold. Nope. Sparta handed out medals in shame. History leaves receipts. Archaeologists dig up graves shoved far from the honored dead. Pottery shards screaming exclusion. Houses branded like billboards. Loser lives here. This wasn't oversight. It was neon exile. Basically, the ancient Greek version of getting a kick-me sign taped to your house. Then came the economic guillotine. The Kleros land system was supposed to secure families. But the second your husband flunked, your land claim wobbled like rotten wood. Officials strolled in, smug, cataloging every pot, chair, and grain jar, then seizing whatever they wanted. Imagine an IRS audit where the penalty is starvation. And the helots? Gone. Reassigned to better families. Suddenly it was just you, your bare dirt, and hunger staring you down. Without surplus crops, without trade, without even market access, you were financially dead. Owning land without helots was like owning a chariot with no wheels. Useless. Borrowing, forget it. Families cut ties, debts unpaid, dowries canceled, inheritances blocked. Shame was contagious and nobody wanted it in their ledger. Your family tree turned into financial poison ivy, so you begged, scraped, maybe wove or cooked like a helot. Guilds slammed doors, customers shunned you. Poverty wasn't a byproduct, it was policy. You became a walking scarecrow, a sermon to Sparta's children. Fight to the death, or this is your wife's face. Sparta didn't need warning posters. It had starving widows as billboards, and the curse outlived you. Sons barred from land, daughters stripped of dowries, generations condemned. Sparta wanted fear, and it got it. Death wasn't the worst outcome, living was. Sparta turned "till death do us part" into "pray for death, because living is worse." The humiliation didn't just happen in whispers and gossip. Oh no, Sparta made it theater. The wives of cowards got their disgrace packaged into rituals, carefully choreographed spectacles of cruelty. Within hours of bad news hitting the city, the woman was dragged before the ephors, not for condolences, but for a state-sponsored character assassination. They read out her husband's crimes: cowardice, surrender, failure, as if she'd been the one to wet her skirt and run. Congratulations, lady. You just won a starring role in Sparta's favorite soap opera. Shame the musical. This wasn't tucked away behind closed doors either. No dignity allowed. The spectacle happened in the agora, the busiest square, where the maximum number of people could witness her social execution. Every syllable of her husband's disgrace was a nail hammered into her coffin of respectability. She stood there like a mannequin, while the state ripped her life apart in surround sound. Imagine getting roasted in public and not even getting a punchline said at the comedy club. Just humiliation served cold. And then came the parody of mourning. Everywhere else in Greece, widows could wail, claw their hair, and tear their clothes to honor the dead. Not in Sparta. To mourn a coward was itself cowardice. Cry for him? You'd be punished. Break down? You'd be branded weak. So these women had to stand frozen while their world collapsed, forbidden even the human right to scream. Basically, your husband failed, so shut up and smile, or we'll fail you harder. The state loved its costumes too. Honored widows wore dignified black. But these unlucky wives, they were wrapped in rough, undyed cloth that looked more like rags than garments. Slave fashion, basically. Some even had to wear their hair unkempt, a signal of disgrace in a culture obsessed with appearances. Their humiliation wasn't just known, it was stitched into their clothes and knotted into their hair. Forget Gucci or Prada. You're rocking the latest in coward couture. The restrictions turned their lives into a prison without bars. They couldn't show their faces in public during peak hours. They were banned from main roads, pushed into side alleys like human trash. Even fetching water became a crime scene. They couldn't approach wells when others were there, lest their contamination spread through the bucket. Imagine being banned from the communal well because people thought shame was contagious, like some kind of moral COVID. Religion, that sweet refuge for everyone else, slammed its doors shut. Spartan women normally had big roles in rituals, leading dances, making offerings, honoring the gods. But these disgraced wives, exiled, they couldn't join the High Cynthia, couldn't march in processions, couldn't even whisper a prayer at a shrine without permission. Spiritually excommunicated, they were ghosts haunting a society that still kept them alive. Even the gods were like, "Nah, sis, you can't sit with us." And it wasn't just the women. Their kids got drafted into the circus of humiliation too. Sons beaten and mocked in the agog. Daughters unmarriageable, branded with daddy's cowardice like a permanent scar. The whole family turned into props in Sparta's scare campaign. See, kids? Fail in battle, and this is your family's life. Smile. Punchline. Nothing says good parenting like traumatizing children with live demonstrations of how pathetic their bloodline is. Every ritual, every insult, every ragged piece of clothing carried the same message. You don't belong here anymore. You're alive, but you're already buried. Your punishment isn't death, it's existing in public as a monument to disgrace. Sparta didn't need gravestones for its losers, it just kept their wives standing around as walking tombstones. Sparta didn't just ruin these women with shame and poverty, it climbed right into their bedrooms. The state turned their marriages into paperwork, their bodies into breeding farms. When a husband was branded coward or confirmed dead, his wife didn't get choices. She got a bureaucratic shove into the arms of someone else, picked not for love, not for kindness, but for his war record. Forget Tinder. In Sparta, your new match was chosen by the government like cattle at an auction. The ephors, those 5 smug administrators, kept meticulous files on everyone. Bloodlines, landholdings, children produced. They weren't politicians. They were eugenics clerks. A woman's worth was boiled down to her uterus. How young? How fertile? Has she popped out sons yet? The answers decided her fate, cold as a spreadsheet. HR department, but make it hell. Congratulations, you qualify for forced remarriage benefits. If you were still young, still useful for making babies. Remarriage was a guarantee. But don't call it marriage, call it livestock pairing. The state handpicked warriors who had proven themselves in battle to erase the genetic stain of cowardice. Your consent? Not even in the fine print. You were transferred like military gear, shield, spear, disgraced widow. Imagine being less respected than a sword. At least swords didn't have to pretend to be grateful. The humiliation didn't stop there. These women were paraded before potential husbands, inspected like meat in the market. Men talked openly about their bodies, their ability to breed, their worth as vessels. Personal qualities? Nobody cared if you could sing or run a household. Your womb was the only currency. Basically, Spartan's next top breeder, except the prize was another lifetime of misery. And the conditions of these new marriages made sure the woman never forgot her fallen status. She entered as second class, stripped of property, severed from her old family, sometimes even separated from her own children. She couldn't bring her past, couldn't keep her dignity. She was a replacement part in Sparta's war machine. Imagine remarrying and having fewer rights than the family dog, but hey, at least the dog could keep his puppies. The cruelest twist? Many women were forced to marry men who had fought against their first husbands, sometimes the very ones who killed them. Imagine sharing a bed with your husband's executioner, expected to redeem your bloodline by birthing his children. Romance, Spartan style. Forget Netflix and chill. It was more like, murdered your husband, now climb in. Older women got no mercy either. Too old to breed? Then you weren't even worth parading. Some were dumped into slavery-like arrangements, given away as rewards to soldiers or shuffled off to non-citizens like the perioikoi. They became property to be passed around, stripped of even the thin veneer of dignity younger women got. Basically, if your eggs dried up, so did your social status. No womb, no worth. And if that wasn't enough, the state sometimes ran twisted breeding programs, passing women from warrior to warrior, trying to scrub cowardice out of their bloodline like it was a stain. These women became science experiments without consent, their bodies reduced to test tubes for Sparta's genetic pride. Imagine being passed around like a communal wine cup, except nobody even bothered to wash you between uses. Ceremony sealed the deal. The widow had to stand in public, denounce her dead husband as a coward, thank the state for freeing her, then undergo cleansing rituals before being handed off. It wasn't a wedding, it was a staged humiliation. Basically a wedding where the vows are, I hate my first husband, thank you for the upgrade, master. Children from these unions grew up under suspicion, supposed to be redemption babies, but always tainted by whispers. Every stumble or mistake became proof that cowardice ran in their blood. They were born as projects, not people. Congrats, kid. You're not a son, you're a social experiment with sandals. The Spartan state wasn't content with breaking women socially or sexually. It had to break them financially too. Poverty wasn't an accident. It was a punishment, a weapon. They took women who had already been disgraced and then pulled the rug from under them until they landed face first in starvation. Sparta didn't just kick you when you were down, it made sure to steal your shoes first. Land in Sparta wasn't just dirt, it was life. The kleros system gave each citizen family a plot of land worked by helots, those enslaved laborers who kept the whole rotten structure standing. On paper, it was supposed to make families secure. But once your husband was branded a coward, boom, that security evaporated faster than wine at a soldier's feast. Congratulations, your husband failed. You're now the proud owner of nothing but despair. The process was brutal and public. Officials marched in like vultures, making an inventory of your home. Every pot, every piece of furniture, every scrap of grain, they wrote it all down. And neighbors watched, whispering, smirking, while your life got reduced to a checklist. The excuse was ensuring no state property was hidden. The reality? A humiliation ritual disguised as bookkeeping. Imagine a government audit, but instead of taxes, they're taxing your dignity. Confiscations were common. Anything shiny or remotely valuable, bronze vessels, jewelry, ornaments, snatched away. Not stolen, mind you, redistributed. That's how Sparta framed it. Your loss was their justice. And the worst part? You couldn't fight back. You just stood there, watching your last comforts get carried off. Think repo men, but with spears and a state mandate to ruin your life. And then came the helots, those enslaved workers tied to your land, the ones who did the heavy lifting and kept households afloat. Once your man's reputation collapsed, so did your control over them. They were reassigned to better families, leaving you with a patch of dirt you couldn't even work. The land was technically there, but you, starving, helpless, abandoned, owning land without laborers is like owning a chariot without wheels. Good luck going anywhere. Income collapsed overnight. Normally, families sold surplus grain, wine, oil, basic survival goods. That surplus became trade. Trade became survival. But disgraced women, banned from normal markets, cut off from community ties. You couldn't even haggle over bread without people spitting on you. Imagine trying to sell olives and being told, sorry, we don't buy from losers, and don't think family would step in. They cut you off too. Dowries promised to your daughters, gone. Inheritances from your parents, challenged in court, even debts owed to you, vanished like smoke. Cowardice was contagious and nobody wanted their coin touched by your shame. Your last name became financial poison, like trying to cash a check signed by failure itself. Some women tried crawling into trades that Spartans normally sneered at. Weaving, cooking, even manual labor usually dumped on helots. But guilds slammed doors, customers avoided you, and everyone pretended you weren't even human. Work wasn't just humiliating, it was nearly impossible. Welcome to the job market, where your resume just says, wife of a coward, do not hire. So what was left? Begging in alleys, gleaning scraps from harvested fields, gathering wild plants like feral animals, fishing in streams nobody else bothered with. Their lives shrank to survival mode, and even then, starvation stalked them like a shadow. Poverty wasn't a byproduct, it was policy. Basically, Sparta turned women into living scarecrows, standing reminders of what happens when your man screws up. And the curse didn't stop with them. Their kids inherited the poverty. Sons denied land, daughters stripped of dowries. Entire families became hereditary failures, doomed by one man's disgrace. The message was crystal clear: fight to the death or your bloodline rots. Sparta didn't believe in generational wealth. It believed in generational misery. As if shame and poverty weren't enough, Sparta added one more treat to the menu: violence. Not whispered threats, not dirty looks, actual blood, bruises, and bones cracked in public. And here's the kicker: this wasn't mob justice. It was sanctioned, celebrated, practically a civic duty. In Sparta, beating up a widow was less a crime and more like a weekend hobby. Public punishments became circus acts. Wives of cowards dragged into the agora, whipped, stoned, shoved by anyone who felt like joining in. There were no executioners, just citizens invited to participate. Imagine trying to walk home and getting pummeled because your husband didn't die properly. Sparta invented the world's worst flash mob, except instead of dancing, they beat widows with sticks. And the sexual violence? The darkest stain. These women lost even the thin shield of protection their marriage once gave. In the twisted logic of Sparta, their husbands failed to defend the state, so now their bodies were open season. Soldiers claimed them, assaulted them, used them, and no authority lifted a finger. Sparta's motto might as well have been, your husband lost, so your body's community property now. The branding was another cruelty, literal marks scorched into skin, tattoos announcing, wife of a coward, a permanent invitation for humiliation and attack. And the haircutting wasn't symbolic mourning. It was violent, degrading, designed to leave women scarred and ugly, as if shame needed a hairstyle. Forget beauty salons. In Sparta, your stylist was a soldier with a knife and a grudge. Even children weren't spared the horror. Sons stood by, forced to watch their mothers beaten and humiliated, learning in real time what cowardice cost. Daughters saw their mothers treated like trash, warned that their futures were chained to men they hadn't even married yet. Trauma wasn't an accident. It was the syllabus. Sparta's version of family education: kids, watch mom get beaten. That's your history lesson, and don't forget religion. Festivals weren't joyous escapes. They turned into torture theaters. During Artemis Orthia, young men proved their endurance by inflicting pain on these women, beatings disguised as offerings to the gods. To resist was sacrilege. The gods themselves, as Sparta claimed, demanded women's suffering. Even the temple doubled as a UFC cage match, with widows as the punching bags. Archaeology backs it up. Skeletons with broken bones that healed poorly, skulls smashed from repeated beatings, bodies buried in disgraceful corners of the land. Even in death, they weren't allowed peace. Their corpses were thrown aside, denied proper rites, erased from family monuments. Sparta didn't just ruin your life, it trashed your afterlife too. 2-for-1 cruelty special. And here's the cruel twist of the knife. Other women joined in. Proud Spartan mothers, wives of successful warriors, even young girls. It was state policy to make them attack their disgraced sisters. Stones, insults, physical assaults, all in the name of loyalty to Sparta. Sisterhood, dead on arrival. Basically Mean Girls, Spartan edition, except instead of gossip, they threw rocks. Everyday life became a gauntlet of petty brutality. Shoved into gutters, market goods smashed, random blows from passers-by. So common it barely got recorded. Violence wasn't shocking. It was Tuesday. And the state wanted it that way. Cruelty so normalized it vanished into the background. Imagine living in a place where getting punched in the face was as routine as buying bread. The kids of cowards were born into hell before they could even tie their sandals. The second news hit that daddy had run, surrendered, or flopped in battle, the children were branded parasites. Sons, daughters, didn't matter. They carried shame in their blood, a curse written into their very skin. Congrats, kid. You lost the lottery before you even learned how to walk. The sons got the special treatment in the agoge, Sparta's meat grinder for boys. Isolation first, eating alone, sleeping in garbage quarters, kept apart from the brotherhood bonds that made Spartan warriors survive. They weren't comrades. They were contagions. Imagine being quarantined, not for disease, but because your dad sucked at his job. And the abuse? Off the charts. Every Spartan boy got beaten, sure, but the sons of cowards were chosen for extra lessons. Less food, more bruises, more dangerous tasks. Trainers forced them to recite their father's failures in public, denounce their own blood, beg to prove they weren't the same. Imagine school where your daily homework is trash-talking your own dad. The psychological torture was worse. Every stumble screamed coward's blood. Every mistake confirmed the prophecy. Even victories weren't victories, just flukes. These boys lived under a microscope, crushed until they either broke completely or went insane trying to erase their father's ghost. Therapy wasn't an option. Just die in battle and hope people shut up. Daughters weren't spared. In fact, they were chained to the same shame, just differently. They were barred from dances, games, and the gatherings that led to marriage. No warrior wanted a coward's daughter. No dowry could fix bad blood. Basically, your dating profile just said, Dad was a loser, swipe left. Some girls were dumped into slave-like marriages, shipped off to non-citizens or even helots. Others never married at all, cursed to rot in a society where a woman's worth was birthing sons. They weren't women anymore. They were dead weight. Sparta didn't believe in feminism. It believed in recycling women like defective pottery. The rare sons who clawed their way to redemption in battle became propaganda puppets, paraded as proof the system worked. But for most, the only escape was suicide, exile, or madness. Whole generations were crushed under shame. That wasn't even theirs. Sparta invented generational trauma and then bragged about it like it was a war trophy. The wives of cowards weren't supposed to have voices, but some scraps of their misery still leaked through history's cracks. A widow from Sphacteria told Xenophon she woke every morning to fresh insults painted on her door, slunk to the well before dawn to dodge rocks, and watched her son volunteer for suicide just to escape the daily hell. Her story wasn't unique. It was the anthem of the damned. Imagine your kid choosing death because it was literally the better option than living at home. That's Sparta's parenting plan. Graves tell the same story. Archaeologists find women buried far from the honored dead, their bones thin from malnutrition, their grave goods stripped bare. No jewelry, no mirrors, no signs of respect, just the minimum to cover a corpse. Even in death, shame clung like a parasite. Sparta basically said, sorry, even your skeleton isn't invited to the reunion. Foreigners noticed too. Pausanias wrote about seeing these women huddled at the edge of festivals, dressed in rags that screamed pariah. Their faces, he said, looked like souls already starved, and the Spartans warned him not to talk to them, because even pity might contaminate him. Imagine being so toxic, people thought compassion was contagious. Legal scraps survive as well. Cold documents that strip women of property, custody, even the right to use their husband's name. One case records a woman named Gorgo losing everything, not because she failed, but because her man did. Bureaucracy didn't cry, it just erased her existence with ink. Basically, she got canceled, Spartan style, long before Twitter was invented. And then there were the curse tablets, lead sheets scratched with hopeless prayers. One begged Persephone to take her soul since the living world had already rejected it. Another called on the gods to smite those who stoned the innocent. These weren't voices of rebellion. They were desperate cries scribbled in the margins of existence. Think of it as ancient Yelp reviews, except instead of bad service, they complained about being socially executed. Each fragment, each tablet, each grave whispers the same thing. These women weren't forgotten by accident. They were silenced on purpose. And yet their suffering bled through anyway, haunting us centuries later like ghosts Sparta tried to bury alive. Sparta wanted them erased. But guess what? Even ghosts can hold grudges. Not everyone bought Sparta's cruelty as necessary. Sure, the ruling class defended it like gospel, calling it essential for military discipline. One Spartan king even compared society to a bronze shield. One weak spot and the whole thing collapses. Cute metaphor. Unless you were the wife being treated like rust. Imagine being told you're the weak spot in the armor when you never even held the damn shield. Some priests and oracle interpreters weren't impressed either. They whispered that the gods weren't thrilled with innocent women and kids being ground into paste. Every earthquake, every defeat was pointed to as divine punishment. Sparta's answer? Claim the gods demanded the abuse as purification. That's like robbing a bank and saying Jesus made you do it. Basically, God told me to beat up widows. The original scam excuse. Resistance existed, quiet and dangerous. Women shared food in secret, sheltered disgraced families, risked punishment to show basic compassion. Even some men refused rewards that included abusing these women, though they couldn't say it out loud. Reformer kings tried to fix things centuries later, but Sparta was too addicted to cruelty to quit. Imagine trying to rehab a society hooked on violence. It's like sending Sparta to therapy, and it walks out mid-session to go beat someone. In the end, the system was defended, doubted, resisted, and patched at the edges. But it never changed. The cruelty was Sparta's spine, and without it, the whole monster would have collapsed sooner. Turns out, when your entire culture is built on kicking widows, you're not exactly built to last. By the 4th century BCE, Sparta was eating itself alive. The citizen body collapsed from thousands to barely 1,000 men. Every coward's wife ruined, every child driven to suicide, every family erased. Each one chipped away at Sparta's numbers until the great war machine sputtered into a demographic grave. Turns out, if you keep deleting families, eventually you run out of citizens to boss around. Sparta had succeeded in making death look better than survival. Warriors chose the spear over the shame because living was worse. And sure, it worked, until it didn't. The system produced soldiers willing to die, but it also produced a society too broken to actually survive. Sparta basically hacked human psychology, then forgot you can't build a nation on trauma forever. The wives of disgraced warriors were left as monuments to cruelty. They weren't martyrs, weren't rebels, just crushed victims. Their suffering wasn't remembered for change. It was erased, treated as expendable, necessary waste. And in the end, that was Sparta's undoing. When your national strategy is ruin women and children, don't be shocked when your country keels over. Sparta didn't fall in some glorious blaze. It rotted from within, buried under the weight of its own savagery. The empire built on broken women and dead kids collapsed, proving the oldest law of all. No society built on cruelty lasts forever. Sparta thought it was immortal. Turns out karma wears bronze armor too.